Welcome to the Gravity Well, where we break down heavy ideas into small buckets anyone can handle. In our work and at play, we seek the wisdom of elders, individuals and communities that share their knowledge and care for our water, air, land, life, and resource needs. Caring for our homeland will be our guide.
Well, that sounded extra smooth today. Nice work. Um, so
I
do
just
you
slowed
mind?
down.
Yeah. Oops. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, Colin. We'll get to your introduction, but we're just going to take a few minutes and go through a little bit of what we've been working on in the last few weeks. So I'll go first. So we started, as I said, a few weeks ago, and our first discussion, there's a pin in the episode at the top, so you can see what I'm referring to. But so we talked with our positive intelligence network. So Colin, just so you know, I've worked with some coaches on a weekly basis over the last year or so. And so we sought their advice in starting that we set the intention really well. And so that we make sure that we are operating in a space where we're allowing people to bring in different perspectives and be respectful at the same time. So I'm not going to go through the details of our community agreement today, but we've got that available on our social media so that people can weigh in. You know, we want to know from people, does this community agreement weigh or sit well with you? And then the next week, we spoke with a psychologist. His name is Brad Chapin. And the reason why we spoke with him was around overcoming fears. So, one of our concerns in this discussion is that we have to help people get past certain fears in terms of the overwhelming um, nature of being in a polycrisis, if you will. So, we're trying to make sure that people feel, number one, that they understand that we have a regulation system. We have a system in place that helps us stay calm and to tap into that and to also understand when we're in fight or flight. So that's a simple way of discussing those, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn type places we can go to when we are faced with fears, with things, say it a challenge or something, that feels like a threat. So, again, just trying to get in the space where if we can identify what our triggers are, like, and Alex and I have been working on that together when we talk, we try and use common language now so that we can help understand where each other are coming from. I'll give an example. Like I said yesterday to Alex, I'm a in our PQ coaches would say, or I'm in that framework. So we identify our saboteurs in that framework, and my top saboteur is control. So when I can tell, I like yesterday, Alex and I were having a great conversation, and then I was saying something that was getting making. I could see he was frustrated with me, and I said, I think my controller is coming out here. So I was able to like point to something of myself so that we could, look at it and go, what am I doing that's not working, right? Anyway, so that's the next week. And then last week, I want to just touch quickly on our discussion with Reagan Boychuk. So we met with Reagan because we wanted to talk about how do we source good news and not good news, let's say, how do we source quality news? And so we did this great exercise with Reagan where we walked through an organization called Media Lens, and their understanding, what they offer is that we have to recognize that media has a centralization process, and it means that it works in the best interest of corporations and special interests. It's not in the best interest of people and like the public. So we have to look at news and news information objectively. And the piece that really sat with me um, from from Reagan is that to me it's two things. So and then I'll open up to Alex for some of his. Is number one, we want to see supporting evidence. So when I'm looking at this document I shared in the chat, I'm looking at the last line, which is how, right? How do we know how to source news? And so to me, it's two things. It's looking for that supporting evidence. So science-based um, information that's been informed by many different experts, not just one, let's say, and then also that its objective is is for the greater good. So Reagan described it as operating in good faith. So to me, it's I'm looking for information that it has supporting data and that it's operating in the best interest of the public. So those are my two kind of takeaways from that conversation. It was just such a great discussion. Anyway, so I'll let Alex offer a few thoughts and then we'll get into our conversation with you, Colin.
I think my general takeaway from the first three episodes was there's an inherent need for conscientiousness, self regulation, and facts based research. It can be extremely difficult to navigate fact from fiction, fact from opinion, all those types of things. And it was kind of interesting because in episode three, I mentioned Whitney Webb, who's actually quite a famous supposed fact finder, but she never actually provides any of her resources. And upon a deep dive, it was like, okay, she has a lot of opinions, she can drop a lot of names. And if you dig deep enough, you can actually find that she's not incorrect in dropping those names. It's just the fact that she's not providing source links or anything like that makes it extremely difficult, because if I actually wanted to know if she was telling the truth or not, I would have to spend all my days, all my nights just sourcing everything that she said. So I do find that quite interesting, because there are people within the public discourse who are actually quite convincing, but they won't provide any source material. And I find that's actually doing a disservice to everybody. And part of what Jenny and I are trying to do is just exercise our good judgment and take courses where we need to, like the course that we took at Delft University out of the Netherlands in complex decision making and analytics. And it's actually served to provide a focus and a means of discerning what may be fact versus what may be opinion. Now, keeping that in mind with regard to the positive intelligence group and Brad Chapin, what he was saying is like what's most fundamental is self regulation, right? And what we need to do is teach that to people, not only the adults, but the children and ourselves, right? So that we can look objectively at things at face value and discern where the commonalities are, where the common agreeables are. Even if we politically or ideologically or whatever disagree with each other, there are always common trends. There are always things that we can agree upon, even if we're both speaking English, but in a slightly different language. And to be able to navigate oneself effectively and regulate oneself so that we can get there, I think that's what we're setting out to do. So I'll leave it at that. I've learned that through the past three interviews, and I'm looking forward to this one.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. So yeah, I would just if and I'm sure Alex won't mind me saying like we had a great conversation yesterday and it's not easy to work through these lessons together, but I just I'm just so grateful that you're willing to stretch and do all this stuff and with again it always just shows with the best intentions. So thank you again. Okay, so Colin, first of all, I'm just gonna say how I met Colin, and then we'll get into why we're having a conversation with Colin. So. Um, Colin and I were put together with the Calgary Climate Hub. So we both put our names forward. We're both concerned about logging, clear-cut logging planned in southern Alberta. And so we, put our names forward as volunteers, and we both got the nudge saying, hey, there's one other person that cares about this issue. Talk to them. So I can't remember who called who, but spoke to Colin on the phone, and right away it was just one of these feelings that this is definitely a person that I am just um, of the same mind in terms of the urgency of the issues we're seeing, and also just the understanding of the main opportunity that I see in this transition, and that Alex was sort of alluding to before we started this conversation is we have such an opportunity to reconnect with the land and feel really good about um, building community in a way that's healthy and serves us and serves the land and serves our kids, serves everyone. So it's just there's such an opportunity here, and I know from meeting you, Colin, that that's the impression you gave me as well. So I'm really excited to be working with you on that. And then I'm going to let you introduce the video that we are using as a basis of this conversation, Colin. I'm sure you can do a better job than me introducing it. Thanks. And sorry, please take a moment to introduce yourself a little bit and tell everyone a little about yourself. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Um, yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you on the, I guess, anti-clear-cut logging advocacy, and I really came to that work out of, a long time appreciation of nature, um, on, yeah, kind of like a specific location scale, but over the years, especially over the last 4 years, it's grown into a greater understanding of the ecosystem interconnections that we all rely on for our, you know, daily water, air, and food. And so, yeah, the work that I'm seeking to bring to the world is a greater understanding and appreciation of the fundamentals and um, really the magic of nature and all that it provides, essentially the essentials of life, and also bring awareness to the fact that our ecological systems on a local and planetary scale are in a dire situation. We'll talk more about the details of that, I'm sure, but pretty much anywhere, and there's very few places on Earth that humans haven't touched, we degrade the Earth's natural systems because we are out of touch with them. One of the things I wanted to start with in this conversation was a bit of a land acknowledgement, just acknowledging, I believe we're all in Calgary at the moment, but there have been people living in this area, in this landscape, since time immemorial, and yeah, it's not since the time, in the last, essentially since European settlers arrived in this area that the balance of the natural and ecological systems has been continue growing in its intensity of how dysregulated it is. And it's time for us to take some responsibility, acknowledging that, and realize that our long-term survival depends on changing our relationship with the landscape. I've lived in
Yeah,
Calgary in southern Alberta my entire life. I was born just outside of Lethbridge. I feel a deep connection to the lands of southern Alberta. In previous lifetime or careers, I've been I'm an electrician is one of my trades, small business owner, and caregiver. And now I'm looking to extend those caregiving tendencies to the land and the ecosystems that we rely on.
that's awesome, Colin. And yeah, can you talk a little bit about your composting? I'm sorry, the space. If
Yeah,
this is, I'm sorry. Go ahead and just explain some of the projects that you've taken on a little bit. Go for that.
in many ways ties back to I sold a business that was all about waste reduction and you know circular economy education and implementation in 2019. Essentially 2020, that transition ended right before the pandemic started, and I moved in with my grandmother because she had just had her hip replaced and she needed a bit of care. I was, had some freedom from owning a business for like 7 years straight, and then the pandemic hit, and it led to this unplanned, beautiful experience of essentially being my grandmother's primary caregiver for 4 years, and that allowed my life to slow down. Um, and I reconnected with her garden. She lives close to Nose Hill, and throughout my childhood we would walk on Nose Hill. A lot of land-based connection. And in doing gardening, I was doing some research about the soil food web and essentially natural, no, not using salt-based synthetic fertilizers to improve soil health. And I had a bit of a aha moment when I was in experiments with that, and I went to transplant some seedlings, and they were the most healthy, incredibly vibrant, and the root system was just like mind blowing. I was like, oh my god, it works, and that led me to becoming a student of the Soil Food Web School, which is an online based school all about soil microbiology using a microscope and scientific based methods to assess and understand soil biodynamics and essentially the fundamental systems that all life on Earth, or at least land based life on Earth, is based on, which is relationships between bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and other soil-based organisms. And it is a mind-blowing science. And a big part of that learning experience is learning and using how to make compost, high quality compost that is essentially taking waste materials and turning them into the most dense life-based material, biomass that can be used to regenerate soil and gardens, and well, more than just gardens, but essentially land. And it's essentially taking waste materials and indigenous organisms, so soil samples, small amounts of soil from around the landscape, and essentially making it in a specific recipe, and essentially mixing it in a way that
Is that terra preta that you're speaking of?
that I think is what they called the soil of the Amazon rainforest. It was essentially the most like black gold, essentially. Um, yeah. So that's like soil in place, and essentially all compost is a human-made thing, but compost is, or like that process of recycling earth-based material happens in every ecosystem, whether it's a grassland or a forest, and relies on the soil food web to do that. And that's essentially how life on Earth works. Organisms break down materials so it can be used by the ongoing seasonal cycles that happen in an ecosystem is essentially growth, or like life, growth, death, decay, and it all happens again.
Life
That's
cycle.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
this farm, which is a urban farm community hub in Calgary, and for the last 2 years in the growing seasons, me and a couple other compost fanatics and soil food web practitioners have hosted a weekly meetup called Compost Club, and it's grown into a community of people that care about restoring and learning about soil and compost, and it's been quite the positive experience.
Amazing. So we'll have to have a whole other conversation around that. But that's, yeah, this is just such a great example of the work you're doing. So thanks. So I'm looking at the video that Joe Brewer did. So the presentation that he did about regenerating Cascadia. The reason why this is one of the things that Colin put forward to me kind of early on in our conversations where I was just like, yep, absolutely, this guy gets it, that we see in terms of the challenges we're facing right now to have an ecological based economy. So that is where we honor the sort of geographic bounds of where we live, but so, in order to really understand what that means, we have to understand the Earth system. So, today we really want to talk about. So, it's funny, I kind of tongue in cheek called it the laws of the land because I picture us talking about the laws of the land in kind of 6 different ways throughout the year. But in this case, the laws of the land are literally the laws of the Earth, So, that's really what we want to talk about. And why I chose that Joe Brewer presentation is because he does a really good job of explaining the 9 planetary boundaries and that and their interaction with each other and how it basically helps us understand where we get back to this sort of geographic based economy. So looking at the Earth's boundaries like the mountains to the west of us and the basin that we sit in. Yeah, so just understanding the boundaries that actually are, if we were just honoring the earth, living off the earth, this would be the system that we would be held to. And so it's just thinking about the impacts from what we're, as Colin said, our earth is in disarray, right? So these 9 planetary boundaries are a really good way to talk about what how do we define the problem. So those are these 9 problems, let's call it. So that's what I'd like to start with, is just walking through the 9 planetary boundaries themselves. And I've got them listed off here. Let me know if you want to try and explain them, Colin, or if you'd like me to say so and you offer comment, whichever you prefer.
I can take a stab at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please do.
So the background is Stockholm Resiliency Institute, I believe. Yeah, Resiliency Center.
Yes.
Um, in 2009, asked the question of, are there thresholds on a planetary scale that if we cross, it will put essentially human existence on this planet in jeopardy? Is one way of, yeah, and I'm paraphrasing. But essentially, what are the planetary boundaries that keep Earth in a stable, habitable zone? And they came up with nine. I believe they've added a couple over the years, but yeah, I'll quickly
They
go
had
over
the
them.
ninth. The ninth was just sort of novel entities, and now they're sort of
Right.
defining that better. But yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'll start with climate change, but that's climate change is just one of nine. And so I think in a lot of the discourse in today's world, we focus a lot on CO2 and have essentially tunnel vision of CO2, but it is only one of the more like this is a I think you mentioned in the intro that this is a polycrisis and a wicked like these are wicked very complex issues that we face that are so entangled and these nine planetary boundaries kind of get to that and there's feedback back loops and all these things but one of them is climate change and essentially CO2 concentration of the atmosphere. The next is biosphere integrity, which is essentially how ecosystems work and the biological diversity and essentially the pollinators and the plants and the animals and how it all interacts in a very complex system. And due to human impacts, we are essentially degrading those relationships. And if they get to a certain tipping point of, certain extinctions happening, certain collapses can take place. Essentially, like, if bees or insects reach a certain critical threshold of there's not enough of them because we're using too many pesticides and herbicides on our crops, there won't be enough insects to pollinate the crops or pollinate, the landscape. So that's biosphere integrity. Land systems change, so this is very much related to the human impacts again. We are encroaching on more and more land across the planet, and there is less and less land for ecological services like water and the insects that I just talked about. And just so far, we've crossed all of these thresholds according to, yeah, there's only three we haven't crossed. Next on the list is freshwater change. 1% of the earth is fresh water, the rest is non drinkable, non usable water and we are impacting that water more and more as the days go on and the years go by. We're in extreme drought here in southern Alberta. Um, the lack or increasing concentrations of pollution in water, freshwater change is one of the planetary boundaries. The next one is biogeochemical flows. So this is related to ionized nitrogen and phosphorus in the planet, essentially. And this is a huge cause of this threshold cross is synthetic fertilizers from agricultural use. Essentially, after World War II and the green agricultural revolution, all of that came from fossil fuel based or derived fertilizers, which are synthetic and ionized, meaning they dissolve in water. And when they are put on the land and then it rains, very little of it is actually retained by the plants in the soil. Most of it runs off into the nearby stream or river and concentrates and then enters the ocean and causes algal blooms that essentially use up all the oxygen and cause mass die-offs of fish and aquatic life in estuaries and where rivers enter oceans. And yeah, just really disrupt the ecological fundamentals of our of water systems and the land.
Yeah, that's
And so
the
all of those are
microcystine hepatoxin problem from blue-green algaic formulations due to stagnant water and phosphates actually being put into the water. A good example of
yep.
that is Lake Winnipeg, right? Because they built a hydroelectric dam which actually like stagnated the water, and then all these
Mm-hmm.
phosphates were running into the water, right? And the only solution to that is actually wetlands, but they actually removed all the wetlands to produce farmland, right? And then just started dumping these phosphates into the water and stagnating it, which like was really good for fisheries for about 10 years. But then all the fish started to suffocate to death, and now we're left with these microcystines and blue-green algaic formations. And the interesting thing, according to the GSC, the Geological Survey of Canada, is these blue-green algae formations as a result of microcystines and hepatoxins, as a result of phosphates, are responsible for the past most recent 5 major extinctions.
Damn. Yeah. And if you look at the diagram or the chart of the boundaries, the nitrogen, phosphorus, biogeochemical flows are the ones that are the most off the chart. Um, and yeah, this is an ongoing problem. Um, this is why I'm so interested in soil microbiology and soil health. Essentially, these chemical or these when you put these are essentially salts that we put on the land, and salts dehydrate the microbiota. It's like essentially us drinking salt water. We would die. That's what it does to the microbiology in the soil, and so that's killing our soils. We're a dust bowl situation here on an even larger scale, and so there is a way to restore our soils. We stop using synthetic fertilizers. We work to restore the microbiology in the soil and don't use any more salts on it. And over a short period of time, that microbiology can come back. And if the right microbiology is there, the fungi and the bacteria can unlock phosphorus and nitrogen through the nutrient cycling. Essentially, everybody's eating each other and pooping each other out, and that makes based or plant available nutrients, and it's does there's so many benefits to it, but we'll save that for another episode. But this
Love
is
this.
a major global problem that, and a lot of farmers are very much locked into the mindset of like, oh well, we've done it this way for many generations. Like, so all of those planetary boundaries that I've mentioned so far have been crossed. We are outside the realm of survivability. The next three are still within a threshold. They're not like they're still in the green zone, not the red zone. That's ocean acidification, atmospheric aerosol loading, which is just another way of saying air pollution, and stratospheric ozone depletion. And ozone depletion is the most within the zone. I believe it was 1992, there was a big global agreement to reduce CFCs, and we actually healed the hole in the ozone. And that was a relatively simple fix to a somewhat complex global problem, but it's an example of if we actually want to change, we can. And then the last
Yeah.
boundary here is novel entities. This was added, but this is essentially microplastics in the environment. I listened to the Reagan episode and talking about checking sources and all this. This is definitely you can check this out. But novel entities, there's essentially microplastics in every freshwater landscape or system and landscape across the planet. And these
That's the
are
PFAS and PFOS. Those are the forever chemicals that were introduced by 3M in the early 1950s. They've been around
yeah,
for a long time. I find it actually kind of interesting that they've only been added in 2023, 2024. These chemicals, the only way that you can actually leach them out of your body is to breastfeed. Pass them on to your kids.
yeah.
It's messed up.
And they are everywhere. And that's not even the plastics. Those are just like specific chemical compounds, but there's microplastics everywhere. All of our clothes, do you know what the biggest source of microplastics in the world is? Tires. And tires all leach into our waterways, and there's essentially not a waterway on Earth because these microplastics can be transferred by rain. So, even a pristine mountain lake in an area that humans don't even go to has microplastics in it. Thankfully, it's all about concentration. So, glad we don't live in the Mississippi Delta. That's where so many chemicals and things are accumulating in the water. We can be very grateful that we live near the headwaters of a relatively unaffected um, watershed, but nobody's immune to this, and we all drink. Everybody drinks downstream, so it's a very complex problem. Yeah, there's so much to say on those PFSAs, but I don't want to take up the whole conversation, so I'll leave it there.
You did a really great job. So the big takeaway I took, our friend who wrote this, Joe, is that um, these all interact together, and so there can be ways where they work against each other and with each other. So, for example, people have pointed out in the past there was climate model moments where climate models didn't mimic the temperature rise that they had anticipated under the aerosols in the air have actually offered a shield to it. And now recently, actually, some sulfur that was in the fuel used in like marine travel was removed because it was, harming like you said, adding algae plumes and harming the the habitat of the oceans. So they removed that, and now that removal of that sulfur has actually allowed for the atmosphere to warm faster, is what they believe. I think obviously there's a big component of actual increase in emissions at the same time, which is compounding that. But my point is that these interact together, and what the opportunity that Joe is talking about is to look at where these interact and make sure that they are in a, as you say, in a healthy interactive state. So it's not just about knowing the entities, it's about knowing how they work together and making sure that we're honoring the system, if you will. So that's how I describe it. Does anybody want to take another stab at that?
Well, I've been looking into the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory and their multi-decadal climate change models, and they've noticed like a variance over usually typically like 4 decades in ocean temperature, and it varies like give or take like 1 to 1.2 degrees. So GFDL research has kind of pinpointed that there are these fluxes in ocean temperature, but they produce certain types of weather. So there's different types of science that's actually coming out to contribute to these conversations. And my question would be like, given that science is always questioning itself and we never want to limit it, would it not also be prudent, like, to sort of adapt our infrastructure a little bit to be a little bit more resilient to these fluxes within the climate, and to maybe sort of find a way to capitalize on providing seeds, encouraging people contributing to the water table by growing indigenous plants to their regions, and starting to understand that like topographically regions are very different, but we can actually like educate each other on these different topographies and create some sort of communal camaraderie in terms of like what each topography yields to be able to contribute back to overall atmospheric health and the health of our planet in its entirety.
Yeah, I don't know. Like just going back to those planetary thresholds, just yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be too blunt, but to me it just looks like things are changing so rapidly that I guess this relates to tipping points. Like I feel like the rate of change recently in the last say 2 years compared to like if you just look at things like wildfires, floods, temperature anomalies, sea ice, the list could go on. In the last 2 years, everything is absolutely off the charts. Drought in southern Alberta, and a lot of mainstream or like a lot of different voices like to say, "Oh, this is cyclical. This has happened before." I truly hope that that is the case, but based like based on the information and data I've come across as well as what I witnessed out my own front door, this seems like a very extreme situation, and yeah,
Well, and
I
there's
don't know
science to
why.
back that up, right?
Yeah,
I,
and I don't know
I,
why
I don't disagree
more.
with that at all.
Yeah,
Actually, like I was born and raised in Alberta, like and 42 years standing living here, and I don't disagree with that at all. I would just ask, like, is mismanagement of our infrastructures and aqueducts and our agriculture and landscape management, does that have anything to do with it? Does that have anything to do with the disconnect between what's actually going on the ground and our leadership?
yeah, I think humans are pretty nearsighted. It's hard for us to think um, well in advance. Politics is even uh, structured in a way that creates even more short-term thinking, and we should severely, like, really question politicians that say that they're, have the answers to all of our issues, because these are complex issues that nobody knows the answer to, and the only way we are going to figure it out is if we take the blinders off and have hard conversations about how our lifestyles are essentially contributing to the problem as well as contributing to us not being able to address it. We need more than a wartime movement to reframe our societies and our modern lives in a way that prepares for the dire consequences that are essentially knocking at our back door right now. And Mother Nature's ready to come in with a pitchfork and, huck us out on the back of the compost pile so she can start over again. And yeah, essentially these thresholds equal we've overshot, we've jumped the shark.
Yes.
We are outside of the realm of survivability. Like there's no way our way of life can continue, and everybody wants it to, but and these are, yeah, I don't know, people that listen to this might see it, call me alarmist, but I think we need more alarms so that we can have a lot. Yeah, I want to bring it back to a few things you said in the intro. We need conscientiousness, self-regulation, and facts. And so we need to be aware of what's happening. We need to be able to hold that grief and that fear and that oh shit together, and be like, we got each other's backs. How are we going to change? Like, this affects our water, our food. Yeah, and it's a bit isolating when you know these, when you become attuned to natural systems and the beauty of nature. You have to grow a hard shell, or else the world's just going to make you depressed. And we need more people to acknowledge these, not put their head in the sand, have eyes wide open, and have, open, honest conversations about what we do to deal with it. But
100%.
me,
It doesn't mean that they're
media,
helpless. In fact, it's quite the contrary.
yeah, and that's where I hope we can find a shift where I don't really think mainstream media or mainstream politicians are where the solutions lie. I see the solutions being in grassroots, community-based organizing, which I'm still have no idea exactly how to do, but that's where I want to work, is essentially developing systems that are underground, like like the mycelium and like mushrooms. Like, how do we decompose this system that is currently operating above? We know it's
I
modern
think like
politics. They're not.
systematically, it's like through education and advocacy, like exactly what you're setting out to do.
Yeah.
Like just as you decompose soil, right? Because like every aspect, every cog in those wheels, like every single aspect of that system needs that sort of slow decomposition and nurturing and caring so that it can regenerate and grow something else. So I think though we want all these changes to happen rapidly, we need to allow for people to absorb what's so important, which is like nurturing environment, nurturing our communities, and planting seeds and allowing that soil to regenerate. Because, you know, politicians will say what they do, but the people on the ground, all of us who are dealing with this and scared of this, actually need to inspire each other to use the tools that we have, and if we don't have them, help to educate each other to facilitate developing those tools.
One thing to that, how it's helpful for me to think of Joanna Macy. I don't know if you guys have heard of Joanna Macy, but she has a framework that she calls the Great Turning and the three stories of our time. This has also been explained as like three horizons by other people, but yeah, there's three essentially simultaneous unfolding stories happening at the same time. One is business as usual, which is essentially, we all know what that means. And then there's the great unraveling, which could be the collapse and the falling apart of institutions and ecosystems. And then there is the third horizon. And so this involves hospicing, like businesses, or like hospicing the great unraveling, transitioning business as usual to the compost bin, we'll say. And then yeah, this is not going to be an overnight process, and this is going to be a slow and drawn out thing. So, what is the work of certain people to do towards that third horizon? That is what comes after, like, yeah, after business as usual and the great unraveling.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just gonna give a little recap of where my just I should have let this off, Colin, but I'll just offer we always try and work through kind of this who, where, well, starting with why we're talking, which we did, and then this who, where, when, what, how type framework of this conversation. So We talked about who, so this is, this is everybody. We're all impacted by this system. It underpins our lives, like you've said. We just sort of get to enjoy reap the benefits of it. We turn on our taps and there's water, and we go to the store and get food, and let alone there is a whole system that feeds that, a big complex system that's worldwide, and that system that we've imposed on the earth is too much. We've pushed the earth in six boundaries, and now what we're experiencing are the shift in the system that's out of balance. So we're seeing, the ice caps are melting. We're seeing changes with respect to the coral reefs, and we're seeing changes in terms of the weather cycle system because of those major changes, and the thought of a big sea level rise due to that is all part of this imbalance that we are now in and experiencing, and trying to make way of. So what I really liked about Joe's discussion is that he talks about this concept of bioregions. So can I tip that to you, Colin? Would you mind trying to explain bioregions and what they mean in terms of, sort of like I mentioned earlier, this ecological based economy type thing?
Yeah, bioregions. Yeah, I kind of want to take it back to the land acknowledgement just to start. There's a website called native-land.ca. I don't know if one of you can put it in the chat or in the comment section, I guess it's called. But it is essentially a map of North America, also known as Turtle Island, of different languages and territories of First Nations people. And in many ways, this is a bioregional map. First Nations people were very much integrated into their landscapes and, weren't able to travel halfway across the country easily. They were limited to essentially living and thriving within a set geographic area, which likely had similar water, uh, flora and fauna, and just climate and geographical boundaries. And so that's one way of looking at bioregions. Another way of looking at bioregions is, as watersheds. If you look at an image of the Earth from outer space, there is no straight lines. There is no nation-state borders. It's bounded by ecoregions, boreal forests along the northern crown of the northern hemisphere, grasslands, deserts. Those are like big, large bioregions. But how I like to think about it is they're all fractal, and fractal patterns are, a fundamental pattern of nature. Everything gets smaller but follows a similar pattern if you're looking at a plant, but also watersheds. Watersheds are a lot more dynamic, and they
Fibon-
obviously, yeah,
Sorry, I was just going to
they
say
don't
the
show.
Fibonacci
Yeah,
sequence.
go ahead.
This Fibonacci sequence, right?
Yeah, fractals are more like just like a nest of, if you look at a leaf, and then or maybe even mountains. If you look at a mountain, it's jagged and has a certain pattern to it. You go up closer and you look at a cliff, it kind of follows that same pattern. You go up closer, you look at a rock, it kind of follows that same pattern. And that is the fractal nature of yeah. And so there's
So it's
large
sort of like the
bioregions and
so
small
it's sort of like the
bioregions.
Venus system of a tree root and the tree above ground. They're virtually identical. Or if you look into the iris of a person, it looks exactly like a supernova.
Yeah, those are great examples. Or like, yeah. When it comes to bioregions, I guess that's just one part of them. But I'll bring it down to southern Alberta. So southern Alberta is, if I wanted to define that as a bioregion, as maybe a medium-sized bioregion, it would be from the Continental Divide, which is where water flows, one way or the other. And so the water that flows towards from the Continental Divide is our large kind of water catchment, and all flows into the Bow River Basin. But within the Bow River Basin, there are smaller watersheds. There's the Ghost River, there's the Jumping Pound River, Elbow, Highwood, Sheep, Old Man. All of those are their own nested bioregion. And so organizing, yeah, my vision or my one way is territory, like organizing by those landscapes and you can essentially have small councils of people and stakeholders that live, say, within the Highwood watershed, and they have their own set of local contexts of that river and that kind of eco region and the land that's there. And if you live there, you would want to meet as many of your needs from that direct bioregion, but then you would then be part of a larger council. It's almost like municipalities, provincial, federal in a way, but very much tied to the landscape, not to the fifth meridian and certain degrees of latitude. So yeah, each bioregion has its own unique water systems, flora and fauna, native plants, and climate and temperature. And so some bioregions are more, like the Okanagan would be a bioregion. It produces a lot of fruit and has, year-round water, where the grasslands of southern Alberta or the Great Plains of southern Alberta relies on its water from the headwaters of the mountain forests. Uh, Much better for growing crops. And there's different. So each bioregion has its own unique set of circumstances, and the solution, or like the economics and the culture, and yeah, essentially the people that live there, they live different lives, or they have different means of making livings, and yeah. But all this has been thrown out of whack by modernity, the access to cheap oil and gas, essentially the machine of capitalism. It draws people to where there are resources that aren't necessarily part of the living landscape. And so this is where you get into mining and oil and gas extraction. Uh, Also layered on benefits of the land, access to water, access to cropland. And so right now we're in a system where there's probably more people live in Calgary than the landscape can naturally sustain. We have to ship in food from, Mexico and California, and it makes us
And what's
fragile.
the carbon footprint on that? You
Yeah,
know, and like let's actually look at some place like Redcliffe, Alberta, right, which is just outside of Medicine Hat. They have one of the largest greenhouse complexes in North America, and they grow vegetables year round, right? Like they don't just build greenhouses to grow pot, they build greenhouses to grow food, which I think is actually really important, and that's a crucial piece of low cost technology that could actually alleviate some of the carbon footprint on our landscapes. And it shouldn't be overlooked that type of success should be spread, you know, because we can actually, by growing local, reduce a lot of the carbon footprint, not have to ship by truck 25,000 liters of diesel for 25,000 strawberries, 7 trucks per day per grocery store, when we can just grow it locally, you know. So, like,
I
territorial
love that.
governance is actually an amazing thing. If we really look into it, it's like we can save so much money and we can reduce the footprint and we can provide healthy food. I just don't see the disconnect, and I find it really frustrating. No matter how hard I try, it just seems like no one's really interested in actually doing something amazing.
To the story of modernity, and essentially we all believe in an unlimited growth potential. That's why we have to sell our oil and gas to China and to the States. If we looked at our oil and gas endowment as a legacy to honor and cherish on a territorial perspective, we could be the most utopian place on earth where we don't have to work. I don't know, this is getting quite out there, but like coming back to the Red Cliff, but like, yeah, we have amazing resource of all these existing oil and gas wells, essentially just sticking out of the ground in Alberta, money of which have been abandoned, but still have I've always thought, why don't we build greenhouses right next to those and use the natural gas to grow food year round? Yeah, there's a growth
100%
economy.
carbon capture, sequestration, pump that carbon into the greenhouses, grow food.
Exactly. And back to the story, we all just think that we all need to make more money, have a bigger house, and do better and better than like year over year. Our planet cannot sustain that, and we need to come to grips with a change in the way that we look at wealth and prosperity. I look around these days in my younger generation friends, and everybody is just exhausted, working to the bone in order to make enough money to afford the house that they need to. Everybody's just stretched way too thin. We would, if we took a different approach, we could be much happier, healthier, sustainable, and I don't really like the word sustainable because that just means like, you're not you're not doing any harm, but you're not doing any good. And the natural order of life is to regen. The promise of material wealth and unlimited growth is killing our planet. If we flip that on its head, we would want to restore life and restore abundance of nature on the planet and sacrifice the monetary and the, fancy cars and all the things that are, increase our GDP but are going to kill us in the end.
Thank you. So that was amazing. Thank you for explaining bioregions and talking a little bit about what it looks like. And Colin, like I'm right with you, and I feel your pain in terms of people saying like, "Whoa, that's way out there," and that's. But what you and I have always talked about is we're not dictating the timeline here. This isn't you and me or saying, "Hey, everybody, give up your stuff." We're experiencing extreme drought in southern Alberta, and there's likely homes that are not going to have water to them. Like, this is the reality of what we're facing. So, let's talk about the opportunities. So I'm just going to offer some of my. So, one of the questions I ask myself in this process is, what do we do when we're stuck? And so, the key takeaways that I heard from Joe's discussion is that we want to define a shared identity. So we need this pro-social context. So we're trying to make sure that we're setting out to have this shared identity and purpose where we have equitable allocation of and contribution and benefit. Like, so you've got equitable allocation on one hand and you've got contributions and benefits on the other, so you're making sure that there's a sort of an exchange, this sort of, I think of, rather than a sustainable, I think of the infinity loop, right? You've got this cycle happening, and that we have fair and inclusive decision making, and that we have fast and fair conflict resolution. A lot of the problems we have is we don't have a lot of conflict resolution happening. We have a lot of everybody get in your tribes and let's pretend like everything's cool when we just stay in our tribes. So to me, it's this collective outcomes based system where we define the rules together, we have this shared identity, we've got this understanding that we equally contribute and there's an allocation that's around those contributions, and that it's fair and inclusive and fast with an expectation of overcoming conflict. So those are my key takeaways. So I guess since we are close to the hour, or we are at the hour, those are my key things, and then I'll just hand it off to you guys to offer some of yours. So
I'll make it quick. First off, I just want to say this was an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it. I know you guys don't like the word sustainable, but I think a good start, and my takeaway was from his talk, was he emphasized the necessity for stability projects. So if sustainability is just a start, if we can stabilize things, then I think like we should focus on that. And then once things are sustained, once things are stabilized, we can start to really experiment and share knowledge and share all these other things so that we can look at making the standard of living better for everybody possible. And then also he had another thing that I found quite interesting, and this is in relation to topographical differences, right? Like what plants you can grow where, all this type of stuff. He kind of he emphasized the requirement for territorial autonomy or territorial self-governance, in which like each territory or each community or each topographical region within the planet can say what they can do and what they can't, and then they can share that knowledge with each other, and then the other topographical regions can share information and technology and innovation and all those things together so that they can build each other up. And I think like those were my two main takeaways from what he was trying to say, and I think it's actually quite encouraging to know that like these conversations are actually happening. We can figure out a way together to build each other up despite deficiencies depending on topography. We can contribute to each other. We just need to kind of open those dialogues, open those conversations despite our own individual biases.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just you mentioning, despite the individual biases, I think it's so important that we try very hard, despite how uncomfortable it might be, to make unexpected alliances. These are issues that cross all political boundaries, and those in power many times try to divide and conquer only to gain more power, but we need to realize that the power lies with the people. And then coming back to Jenny's question of what do you do when you're stuck, I like to go into nature. I think nature has such healing properties for our mind and body and soul. And there's great benefit in going into nature alone for self reflection, but there's also great benefit in going into nature and engaging in natural processes in community. So, yeah, my grassroots organization that I haven't mentioned yet is called Land Lovers. Um, it's it's all about essentially loving the land together and alone. From that, new ideas, new connections spring from it, and that's essentially the fundamentals of like Compost Club. I've seen firsthand the benefits of people getting their hands dirty, making compost, getting, working in the soil. It's good for the individual and good for the community. And brings together diverse people. That's another, you look at a natural ecosystem, it's not just one kind of thing, it's many diverse peoples, and that's what makes it work. And so, yeah, diversity, nature, working together across, despite our biases, that's going to get us going in the right direction. So thank you very much for hosting this talk. And really appreciate what you guys are doing. And I look forward to engaging in more conversations in the future.
Yeah, you bet, Colin. You're absolutely going to be a callback. So thank you so much for this. We just scratched the surface of what we're working on, and yeah, hoping to potentially work with Joe. Like he is making his way across North America, from what I understand, and so we're hoping to this is a first kickoff conversation of the work he's doing and what it means, and just trying to get people to think about what does an ecological based economy look like, and get thoughtful in that space, and then hopefully actually get some, as Joe said, pull the tapestry together, right? We've got many people working, doing great things in this province but also elsewhere, and that we do have the time right now to learn, as Alex was saying, and then, we'll be in this place where we at least can put the tapestry together, as Joe, well, maybe I'm not saying it as well as he did, but as he alludes to. So yeah, thank you so much for getting this conversation going. I think it's really important for people to understand, what this crisis is. As you said, Colin, it is not just a climate change problem. This is a nine, facet problem that is most well, that is the cumulative impacts of our wasteful and ever growth economy. So thanks. We've started it off, and I'm really pleased with how we went here. So thank you so much. So you can unmic and say goodnight if you'd like, and then we can sign off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to future conversations.
Absolutely.